Is Summer of Night by Dan Simmons a horror novel, or is this Simmons's portrait of his own childhood in a small town in 1960, camouflaged in horror trappings? Let's get into it. Hey, it's Andrew with the Isle of Misfit books, where we discuss books that have struck me and stuck with me in my 25 years of working in rare books. Today we're going to be taking a look at Dan Simmons' horror novel Summer of Night from 1991. Very much in the mode of Stephen King's short story The Body, which went on, you might be more familiar with as Stand By Me, the movie that was made out of that book. This definitely has those kind of vibes. Group of boys riding their bikes in a small town out into the countryside and finding adventure, finding horror, coming into contact with death. Stephen King's It is also very similar, and Summer of Night is right along those lines. Is this an actual horror novel, or is this more a portrait, a very loving, very nostalgic, rose-tinted portrait of Simmons' own childhood in a small town in Illinois in 1960? And I think really that's what it is. And I think that's where it's at its most effective and most affecting is getting into those nitty-gritty details of this group of boys. They call themselves the Bike Patrol, 10 years old, I think 10 to 12, prepubescent, basically, like just starting to come into contact with girls and with sexuality, right on the cusp of that, but not quite at that stage yet. And also that time period, 1960, interesting in that our society is similarly on the cusp of some pretty big changes, some pretty big, like almost hormonal changes. Just pre-women's rights, women's lib, just pre-civil rights. We're still in the post-war boom and not yet at the period of massive societal upheaval and change that was due a long time coming. These boys all go to the same school, and within that school is an evil that has been brought to that school, as we learn through the course of this very long novel. The evil comes from Catholic European aristocracy. It is a belle that is literally brought over to the US and ensconced in this school. And that is ultimately the rot that spreads its evil out into the world, and for some reason picks on this particular group of boys. There are 5 core boys in this group. There's sort of the Simmons stand-in with his brother, and then there is the writer wannabe, Dwayne. Dwayne is part of the group, but he's also sort of an outsider. I think he's the most interesting of the lot. And while he is the writer in training, or the wannabe writer who is writing all the time, he's not really the Simmons stand-in. There's another character who is the Simmons stand-in. Dwayne is a little bit more sure of who he is, who he wants to be. He, I think, has the most interesting story. He has an alcoholic father that he lives with and, struggles to deal with. He's the one who sort of starts to piece together where this evil has originated and what its purpose is. Unfortunately, and spoilers, but unfortunately, Dwayne is killed off about halfway through, and like I said, he's the one character who's actually starting to piece together things and would actually be able to explain it. Now, the other boys do find his notes and are able to kind of piece it together, but basically, it seemed to me like a way to, Simmons was starting to get into where this evil comes from and what its purpose is. And I think almost sort of like the evil does, kills off the one character capable of maybe making some sense out of it so that he doesn't have to make much sense out of it. And then he's gone. And it's kind of a shame because, like I said, I think him and his struggles with his father makes for the emotional heart of the story, at least for me, for that first half. And then when the boys do finally have this sort of apocalyptic showdown in the school with this evil, the mouthpiece for the evil does even say to them, well, I could explain it all to you, but I'm just going to kill you instead. I'm not even going to bother since you're just going to die. So Simmons basically provides no rationale for why this evil is there, why it's picking on these boys, aside from this convoluted history that gets this Catholic, aristocratic European invention from Europe to this very small town and has it starting to infect the town with its corruption. So Summer of Night is at its best when Simmons is just spending time with these boys in their life, in their interactions with each other and with society, going to a party at one of the popular girls at her house, her birthday party is a great scene. Why wouldn't it be enough to write this novel of this group of boys with kind of maybe focusing on Dwayne with his drunk father and their complicated relationship? Why isn't it enough to have this be a coming-of-age tale about this group of boys and the bully that persecutes them, which is a part of this story, the outsider girl who is also a part of this story, Cordy, maybe a missing child, and then one of the members, Dwayne, who is brilliant and really wants to be a writer, but who is struggling because of his complicated relationship with his alcoholic father. Like that is more than enough for a novel. And it is, this is a very long, thick novel, and that is the story at the heart of it, really, to my mind, for much of the book. Why does it have to have this horror packaging, these trappings of horror, of this mysterious corruption that is sort of infecting the world around them? The best of it is when it is staying grounded and staying realistic and is focusing on that coming-of-age story and this obviously idealized and nostalgic picture of a time gone by. Very well described and beautiful. And I'm not the biggest horror fan, but the horror elements of this story just seemed kind of unconvincing to me, and also just a little too varied, really. Like there were different ways in which this evil could take over people, whether they were alive or maybe once after they were dead. There are these like worms that come out and sort of infect people and can kind of take over them. It can seem to speak through people at times. There are these large land lampreys, these like almost sandworms or landworms that tunnel through ground at very rapid paces, unbelievably rapid paces. A lot of the horror elements just kind of took me out of it. There were some tense moments and some shocks, some scares, but nothing terribly frightening or scary or even terribly suspenseful. And that ambivalence, I think, is present in his own treatment, Simmons' own treatment of this character that wants to be the writer of Dwayne. Dwayne is the one who really wants to be the writer. He's always making notes and doing character sketches and things like that. I always think it's kind of interesting when a writer is ambivalent about the writer in his own book. And if you want to see a video about Song of Kali, I will have a link, which is also by Simmons, also featuring a writer, two writers actually in this book. I think that kind of the internal conflict of like wanting to, not just wanting, but writing a very serious novel. And again, not that horror can't be serious. The conflict in this novel is so evident. The realistic, grounded narrative versus the horror aspects of it, the fantastical, that really are just fighting to come together. In this edition, which is from 20 years after it was first published, from 2011, the introduction by Simmons is a very long diatribe, really, about the nature of childhood. He obviously remembers childhood from, as we all do, with a certain amount of nostalgia, rose-colored glasses, and is lamenting the loss of autonomy for children today, lamenting the rise of helicopter parenting. And, I was the age of these boys in 1980, so 20 years after the timeline of this novel, but certainly remember, and I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and certainly remember having a lot more freedom, a lot more autonomy than my own kids did when they were this age, which would have been, say, 2011, 2010, a good 30 years later, in a much bigger city in Philadelphia. So, you know, as times change, as we all sort of have over the generations made this migration, generally speaking, to larger cities, to bigger suburbs, the way that we view childhood has changed as our families have also become smaller, you know, no longer having 5 or 6 siblings, but, you know, 1 or 2, maybe 0 siblings. Expectations about what childhood is also change. Parental guidance changes. Like, all of these things certainly change and have changed. And a lot of it maybe not for the better. I think it is good for kids to have that autonomy and to be out in the world with other children in a safe place, but still able to take risks, still able to learn by interacting with other children. I think it is a shame that a lot of that has been lost. And it's interesting that there's a very long preface to this that really is focusing on that. And when you look at, like comments on Amazon or on other people's YouTube videos about Summer of Night, so much of that is what is coming out because this is such a convincing portrayal of childhood at that time. Again, with a lot of nostalgia and rose colors. It's interesting what he holds up as an example of why that time was so great was putting his own younger brother into a cardboard box and rolling that box down a hill into a quarry. And it's like, is that really what we want our kids to be doing to each other? Was that such a beneficial experience for you, and especially for your younger brother? Your younger brother might have had a different take on that. It's just kind of amusing, but there are benefits to it, but there are certainly disadvantages as well. And the bully that is in this book is one of the possible negatives of just letting Lord of the Flies take place in our suburban neighborhoods. Anyway, I think it's a fantastic book. I really enjoyed reading it. It's very much a page turner, but like I said, really very grounded in that specific time and place and vibe. If you like Stranger Things, if you liked it, if you liked Stephen King and any of those sort of tales about group of boys off having adventures, it's fantastic. Again, the horror elements didn't work very well for me, but I'm not a huge horror fan to start with. I wanted to be scared. I want horror to work on me. I want to be scared. I just didn't find it terribly convincing. That being said, I thought it was a fantastic book. So I would love to hear what you think. What genre is Summer of Night? Is it really horror? And are there other horrors by Simmons that you would recommend for me to read that you think are really scary? And if you want to see my video on Song of Kali, I will have a link to that. Should be popping up in a box if it isn't there already. If you would like to support the channel, I will have a link to Summer of Night in the description box below. Also, it would be great if you would want to take a look at one of my books. I have a fantasy and an action adventure, and descriptions for those are linked in the description box as well. And I've got a couple of new books that I'm wrapping up that I'm really excited about. I'm going to be bringing to you real soon, and I will have more information about that in days to come. All right, please leave a like if you got some value, got some entertainment out of this discussion, and hit subscribe. I'll be putting more videos out like this in the coming days. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one.